I know there are some people in the club who don't have a particular interest in stones, but over the years, I've become more committed to the notion that viewing stones or suiseki are a very important allied art, if you will, to bonsai, and probably one of the most knowledgeable and accomplished people in the area of viewing stones is our own Darrell Whitley. So, and I know Darrell has been he's traveled to Japan, he's traveled to China, he's acquired viewing stones from a number of different areas, including jumping into rivers and hauling them out here. So uh, it's with great pleasure that and enthusiasm that I have the opportunity to introduce Darrell to you tonight, and hopefully more of you, especially maybe younger members, will learn more about this beautiful uh, aesthetic of appreciating viewing stones that bring back ideas and memories and visions of what we see in these stones. And these stones are, many times were in many centuries ago were acquired by um, uh, uh, the I'm trying to search for the word, but the literati in Japan and other places, and they would place them in their studies or their offices or their places of work where they could study them and be transported essentially to another place. So anyway, with that in mind, here is Darrell Whitley.
Oh, Tom, that was so kind of you. So thank you very much. So I'm going to go ahead and start my screen share. And David, you can give me a thumbs up to make sure everything goes just fine. Are you seeing it?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
So given the nature of our club and that some people may not know a great deal about stones, I sort of put together a talk that mixes some bonsai and some suiseki, and to be honest, a little bit of travel log and Japanese gardens, because I also think we have things to learn from Japanese gardens. I'll just remind everybody, if you still have some images on the sidebar, you can remove those as well by just going up into your upper right corner and minimizing the photographs. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about viewing stones or suiseki. I'll be talking somewhat about bonsai and somewhat about Japanese gardens. And David, if you could do a mute, because I'm getting some feedback on my side, that would be great. So first, I want to say that I spent the fall of 2019 in Japan, and I was in Nagano, which is in the Japanese Alps. And a couple of things I point out about this is that most of you have probably heard of Itoigawa. It's here, just north of Nagano. Some of you may know of the sister city of Denver, which is Takayama, and it is over here. Takayama is actually extremely difficult to get to. To get to Takayama, you have to go to Nagano, you have to go up through Itoigawa, down to Toyama, then south into Takayama. So that is a difficult city to actually reach. Why Nagano? Well, one, I know people there, but also it's in the Japanese Alps, so it's a mountainous region. This is a photograph of Kamikochi, which is one of the major mountains in the Japanese Alps. Kami is a Japanese word that roughly translates into deity or goddess or spirit, or more generically, just something that's worshipped. Also near Nagano in the Japanese Alps are the snow monkeys. We were able to go there a couple of times. It's just an amazing experience you're in the forest, they're all around you. Just crazy, amazing experience to see these monkeys in the wild. And also they love to lounge in the hot springs that naturally occur in that part of the world. It's very close to Obuse, which is the where the bonsai gardens of Shinji Suzuki are located. That's where Michael Hagedorn worked. That's where Matt Reel worked. And it is a very beautiful garden, very lovely in the way that it's laid out. Soba. Soba noodles are famous from Nagano and Obuse, and absolutely wonderful in that part of the world. The other thing that's wonderful about Nagano is if you go to Tokyo, you can easily, if you stay in a nice hotel, you can easily spend $200, $300 a night. In Nagano, you can stay in a nice hotel for $60 to $100 a night, very close to the train station. So that also makes it a very friendly place to visit if you're a tourist and you just want to go to a city and hang out for a while. Onsens. The Japanese are very enamored of natural hot springs. They build public baths around these hot springs. No tattoos are allowed in traditional onsens because the Japanese consider tattoos a sign of criminal elements in their society. Not saying that's true or not true. I'm just saying that traditional onsens don't do that. They are not clothing optional because no clothing is allowed in these onsens. And but you go to an onsen, there is an outer bathroom where you're considered where you stop and you bathe. And then after you're thoroughly clean, you move on into the natural hot springs. But I put this in for another reason, which is look at the interplay of stones and trees in this onsen. By the way, this was my neighborhood onsen when I lived in Japan. This was just within walking distance, less than a half mile from my apartment. And after we discovered this, after a couple of weeks, we went to the Japanese baths twice a week anyway. Just a fabulous experience. But look at the interplay of tree and stones. These are giant limestones. This has a hole through the middle. It has an enormous amount of character. There are small trees scattered through here that have been obviously manicured and with both trimming techniques and bonsai type techniques just create a beautiful garden scene. And this sort of sets a theme of what I want to talk about tonight, which is in Japanese gardens, you will see stones and trees, manicured trees, always mixed together or almost always mixed together. Maybe not in some of the very dry Zen gardens, but in most gardens you will. And these things are just wonderful. And it also sets up the theme that we should think of trees and stones as in the same breath, as being related to one another as an art form. So in a Japanese garden, things that move and things that do not move should be placed in good balance. We arrived in Nagano. We went to lunch, and outside, next door to the restaurant, our first day in Japan, in Nagano, there was this Zen garden. So this was our first day. I don't think we'd even seen our apartment yet at this point. And I will point out a few things. One, there is a bonsai setting here. The building you see is actually a tea house, and it was a functional tea house. We were there one day and there was a tea ceremony occurring. And just an amazing thing to stumble upon. Now, as a Japanese garden, I would draw your eye to various things here. One is the gravel itself probably represents a lake with stones representing islands. You can see there's a different color stone, larger size, going up through here. That actually represents a mountain stream. If you focus in and look at the bonsai that's setting in this garden, it does not look like your typical exhibition bonsai. It's very naturalistic. And one of the things I found all over Japan is that there are very manicured exhibition bonsai that come from professional bonsai artists. but there is still a very strong naturalistic tradition in Japan, and you can find it all over the country. I found it in Kyoto, I found it in Nagano. People who are maintaining trees in Zen gardens, people who are maintaining trees for tea houses, they are maintaining trees that are not overly styled, but have a very naturalistic look to them, as you can see in this particular tree. And at first, I was unsure what I thought about that, because you want to grab some wire and pull some of those branches down and create a nice compact canopy. But you know what? After seeing these all over Japan, I came to appreciate these naturalistic trees more and more. The other thing I would point out is that if you look, many of the branches here are being tied to bamboo. So they're shaping the branches on these large black pines, and this is probably a red pine in the foreground. But they're using more large-scale techniques in terms of tying things to branches. So here is the lake. Here is the mountain stream. Did anybody see the frog sitting there, the stone frog? It's sitting here as well in this image. So this was lovely. This was close to our onsen as well. I had been in Nagano for maybe a month or even slightly longer than that before I realized there were bonsai growing on the roofs of houses. So at one point I was out for a walk and I looked up and went, holy smoke, there is a greenhouse sitting on the roof of this house. And you can see that there's bonsai all through here. If you look very, very hard in the distance, there's actually bonsai on another roof in the far distance. So there is so little space for most Japanese homes that they have to be creative about where they keep their bonsai collections. This one was on the street, just less than a block from our apartment. I almost tripped on this one day. This is an azalea. It is I would swear, a Kofu category tree, just amazing trunk, large, massive, gnarly, and it's just sitting here inches from the curb. You can see the bumper of the car driving by when I shot this photograph. And I later figured out that this house had what I thought was an azalea hedge, but someone had actually buried, whoever lives here had buried their bonsai in the ground in a little strip about 6 feet long and 20 inches wide, and they had 4 fabulous bonsai just buried in the soil, inches from the pavement. So the other thing I want to talk about is that we were in Nagano. I pointed out earlier that Itoigawa is over here on the coast, and of course, if you know Shimpaku junipers, you know that Itoigawa is one of the famous varietals of Shimpaku junipers from Japan. But I think what a lot of people don't know is Itoigawa is actually just the marketplace. The trees were actually collected here in this national park around Togokushi. The main mountain, or one of the main mountains here, is called Mount Kurohime. And if you know a little bit of Japanese, Kuro is black and Hime is princess. So this is the Black Princess Mountain. If you talk to people in Japan, they do not know this by Mount Kurohime. They do not know this by Itoigawa. They know this as Togokushi, because there is a famous Japanese shrine here in these mountains called Togokushi. So Itoigawa was just the marketplace. The Shimpaku first were being collected here near Mount Kurohime, and then they were taken down out of the mountains to Itoigawa, and then Itoigawa was actually the marketplace. When the trees started to run out in the Togokushi area, they moved down to around Mount Shiro-uma and started collecting in this area as well. This is a picture from Itoigawa looking from the coast toward the mountains. This is a bluff near Mount Kurohime, which is possibly where some of the famous Itoigawa Shimpakus were collected. But again, this is now part of the Togokushi National Park, and there's no collecting here. But even so that there's no collecting, there are no trees left. The Itoigawa Shimpaku were more or less absolutely wiped out by bonsai hunters. They collected them to the point that there are none left in the wild as far as I know, or at least that's what I've heard. I can tell you I had the opportunity to hike in this area. We took a trip to Togakushi to the Jinji Shrine. This is the path going in, although we came in through a backwoods path. It turns out there are signs in the forest saying that there are bears around and to beware of the Japanese bears. But what has happened is that at least near the shrine, Zen monks have planted cryptomera, and these trees have grown to enormous size. So these are gigantic trees, you know, not quite as big as redwoods, but gigantic trees. Picture of me just to show you that I actually did hike along this path going up to the shrine. And now the next thing I want to say is that when I visited, for example, Suzuki's bonsai gardens in Japan, you know, I discussed the trees and what they were doing and the work that they were doing, and the people who had worked there, such as Matt Reel and Michael Hagedorn. But one of the things they were insistent about is that they've seen pictures of Rocky Mountain junipers, and they say, very nice trunks. Your trees have to be grafted. They just were insistent that the Rocky Mountain junipers that we're collecting should be grafted with Shimpaku. Now, you can agree with that or not agree with that, but I'm at least going to talk a little bit about what we see with their trees that we perhaps are missing with some of our Rocky Mountain junipers. So here is a Rocky Mountain juniper with its natural foliage. I think this one is in the collection of Walter Powell. And this is a Japanese Shimpaku with its nice, tight, bright, compact foliage. Just very quickly, you hear of Shimpaku, which is actually Shinpaku. When those two get jammed together, the N starts to sound like an M, and so we get Shimpaku. This brighter green and longer, leggier foliage is the Itoigawa. Here in the middle is Kishu. Here is just a generic Shimpaku. All three of them are just gorgeous, tight, beautiful foliage. I will say here, I started growing these plants about 20 years ago, and I've had tremendous success growing Shimpaku here in Colorado, but I have to give credit to Alan Hills because I saw that he was growing these, and I thought, well, if Alan can do it, maybe I can do it too. And they grow beautifully here. I've had no trouble whatsoever with these plants. Also, don't get too excited about the differences, I think, because here are two Itoigawas. This one has very short, compact needles. This one's leggier. They're both Itoigawa. One just happens to be a little leggier than another. So I saw this tree in person. It is from Shinji Suzuki's gardens. It won the 2019 Prime Minister's Prize at Taikon 10. And this is a grafted Shimpaku. The Japanese even graft their own trees. And it was styled by Matt Reel for Suzuki. But what I want to point out is that there's real balance in this tree. The deadwood doesn't dominate the foliage. The foliage doesn't dominate the deadwood. There's just super balance in this tree. And it just makes for an incredible viewing experience. This is perhaps the most extreme deadwood I saw while I was in Japan. And that's a lot of deadwood. But at the same time, I would argue that it's still well balanced. The deadwood and the live foliage have a similar mass. Notice that the amount of green here is almost equal to the amount of deadwood. And the green has a similar heft or weight to it that rivals the deadwood. So the balance here is just awesome. It's in a big, deep pot, but still overall, it just works. This was a tree from Kokofu that I just happen to love. Again, wonderful foliage, wonderful deadwood. And I threw in this picture just because A, it was a fabulous bonsai, but B, white wild plums grow in the mountains here in Colorado. And I don't know of anyone who has tried to turn our native white plums into bonsai, but they just can make fabulous trees. Here's a tokonoma at the bonsai gardens of Kunio Kobayashi. You can see that there's a very amazing juniper there with deadwood and, again, very balanced foliage. Here is a tokonoma from Himeji Castle, which is near Osaka. And just look at the expanse of that tokonoma, just a wonderful display space. And what they have in it right now, of course, is calligraphy. The Shimpaku at Kobayashi's, in this particular case at Kobayashi's gardens, this tree is about 800 years old. Again, super balanced. And there was an interview with Kobayashi, and he said something very interesting. He talked about bonsaido, which I had never heard before. And he defined it as the path of bonsai. And he said, talking about bonsai, it is thus a path, bonsaido, that leads to perfecting itself. So there's a very strong Zen component, at least to the way that he talks about bonsai. And this is just another picture from Kobayashi's gardens, where he is sitting in front of one of his Shimpaku junipers. And just again, we had to catch a picture with Kobayashi while we were there. I'll let Bill in. So now I want to switch and talk about Zen gardens. I've talked a bit about bonsai. I want to try to pull this together, but here is a public Zen garden. Notice the role that stones play in the garden. They play an important role here. You'll see manicured trees in the background. I also want to show you this garden. The manicured trees don't show up quite as well, but all of these trees have just, every branch, every needle is put in a particular place. And again, stones play an incredibly important role here. Sometimes the stones are just amazing. This large stone here at the bottom, I visited this garden twice? Yes, twice. And this large stone is actually a huge slab of jasper, but it's very weathered. It's not been polished. It's not been buffed out to look like jasper, but it's a huge red stone of jasper. And you get this sort of very subtle experience of the stone going, wow, that is a semi-precious stone, a massive semi-precious stone. It's just sitting here in the garden in its weathered natural state. And again, this garden is amazingly manicured, but there is a naturalness to it, both with the trees and with the stones. This is actually a historically incredibly important garden. This is the garden of the tea master, Senyo Riku, who perfected the tea ceremony 400 years ago. So this was actually his private garden, and his private residence is just off the edge of this garden. Next door is another private garden in the Zen temple, and you'll notice that this stone looks like a boat, and this is actually a boat stone. But it is a gigantic boat stone. It's about 4 feet long. But again, I just want to bring out the idea that within these Japanese gardens, you see stones and you see trees, and they all go together. So taking the theme of boat stones, here is a viewing stone, a suiseki, which is also a boat stone. And it's somewhat abstract, but it is in a bronze, what they call a dobon, and it is filled with sand, and the sand is supposed to represent water, and this is supposed to be a traditional Japanese boat moving through the water. And so again, this is just something to contemplate, something to think about, and also just to meditate upon, really. The other thing that we experienced in Japan that I did not know about is that there were 2 cities that were really left more or less untouched by World War II. One of them was Kyoto, and I assume that was intentional. The other is Kanazawa, which is actually far enough off the beaten path that it was not bombed as well. And there are still traditional samurai gardens there. And this is a samurai's garden. It looks big. It's actually tiny. The previous garden, this looks big. It's actually in a tiny space. You would be amazed how tiny the space actually is. somehow they make their gardens look bigger than they are. But you'll see all these stones and the lanterns and the waterway and the plants, and these plants have all been shaped in a very naturalistic way. You can see a lot of pruning going on if you look closely at some of these plants, but these are very intimate spaces, and they always include plants and stones. So again, this is going back to Kobayashi's gardens, which are in Tokyo. He sometimes displays suiseki, or viewing stones. And one of the things that he says is that bonsai and suiseki are two wheels of the bicycle. This is a suiseki stone, this time in a ceramic container called a suibon with sand. And Kobayashi indicated that what he saw when he sees this is a wave on the ocean. And again, the stone is to be contemplated. It, like bonsai, it takes nature and shrinks it down into a small size that you can bring indoors and also contemplate. So I'm going to show you some examples of some great stones. This is probably the best waterfall stone I've ever seen. It's just amazing. So think of this as being, rugged top of a mountain somewhere where you're hiking. And, it's almost a miracle that there is a spring in this mountaintop and water is flowing down out of this craggy place up in the mountains. Again, this is probably the best waterfall stone I have ever seen. And it's just an amazing stone. I thought I'd throw in a photograph of Kyoto in November during the major bonsai show there, the Taikon 10. They do it in November. The trees are just gorgeous red, and it's a beautiful, beautiful place. At Taikon 10, this stone was shown. It's a flower stone. It's a stone of a former prime minister of Japan. And in Japan, they very much value history. So stones with a long history who have been owned by famous people are highly valued and highly revered. Here's a close-up of the stone. These are actually mineral deposits that create a flower-like pattern. So these are called flower stones. I showed this stone last year, and I'm showing it again. This is a tiny stone. It's actually only about 5 inches across, perhaps. It is a Meiji era stone that was owned by 2 Japanese princes, by the minister of interior at one point, by a high priest at one of the temples, and by a literati painter that is very well known in Japan. So it's been owned by very famous people. It's one of the best documented stones in Japan. But one of the reasons I like to show it and talk about it is, imagine, that looks like Long's Peak. And here is the keyhole. And here is Chasm Lake. So for me, this not only resonates as a Japanese stone, I could imagine it being very much a Colorado stone as well. Another famous stone, this is named after the main character in a Knoll play. And these are flowers. These are crystals. So this is also considered to be a flower stone. The Japanese say that what they see is the character in the Knoll play holding their arm out with their robe extended, and we can see the flowers on the robe of the character who is in the play. Just to give you an idea about how much stones are revered in Japan, this stone was sold in the last, 10 to 15 years, and it sold for $500,000. So they do get excited about their stones. So, suiseki and bonsai. I'm going to be a little bit contradictory here. There are very strict rules about display, a wrong way and a right way, but at the same time, things can be very different in different parts of Japan or in different clubs. So what one part of Japan says, these are the rules and here's how you do it. Another part of Japan might do something very different, and say, no, those aren't your rules. These are our rules. So, you don't always have to take rules as absolute truth. They can vary with different parts of the world. I want to point out that Taikon 10 in particular is more expressive, say, than Kokufu. And I'm just going to show a couple of pictures. I'm not going to go into it like I have in the past, but here is a display known as the Teauchi display. And you'll see bonsai on the ends and stones in the middle. Here is the Honde display with bonsai on the ends and stones in the middle. And these are very famous stones. This stone in particular was passed down for multiple generations through different famous shogun families in Japan. This is a really amazing stone when you see it. Obviously, there's holes passing through. It's on a carved base and it sort of floats on the base. Again, I was lucky to see this at the Taikon 10 exhibit in Kyoto. This is another famous stone, which is from the Kamigawa. The Yase is the upper reaches of the Kamigawa, and the Sudachi refers to the roughness of the surface, and the Maguro just refers to the blackness, and the Ishi just says that it's a stone. Just put in another photograph of a Shupaku from Taikon 10. I was just amazed at this because it doesn't seem to fit any rules, and yet it was just captivating. Here is a bonsai displayed with a stone. That happens very often at Taikon 10 in my experience. The ones that the time I was able to visit there, and in the photographs that I've seen of other Taikon 10 exhibitions. This is the stone. It's a Sajigawa, and just take a second and what do you see? And David, could you just give me a heads up that everything's coming through just fine?
Yeah, everything's working for me. I know that.
All right, cool. So I don't know about you, but I see a wizard, maybe a menacing wizard that's threatening someone, or who knows. But anyway, it is a very dynamic stone. So not all stones are quiet and contemplative. Taikon 10, when I was there were a couple of guys hanging out. Kimura on one side and Morimai on the other side. They were there when I was there in 2019. And now let's just look at a few classic stones. I was able to see this stone at the Omiya Bonsai Museum when I was there. It's an Ibigawa stone. Goshiki, Ishi means stone. The goshiki implies the color of redness here, although red is usually referred to as aka. And one thing I'll say is that the Japanese seem to care a lot more about seasonality than we do, or at least they're more conscious of seasonality than we are. And so this stone would be perfect for displaying in the fall when the trees are changing colors. So it would be an autumn stone. And you can just see as a landscape stone, it's I would say a near mountain stone because you can see texture on the stone, but the red colors would make you think of autumn. So this would be a fall stone. And that is fairly large. It may be 18, 20 inches across. And from a pre-World War II collection, and the stone was lost for many years after World War II. This is a Setagawa stone from near Kyoto. The Setagawa stones are often black with lovely texture and sort of smooth forms, sometimes pitted with little pits. They call them pear skin when they have that pit. And the pit comes from the erosion of mica in the stone. But just a very quiet mountain stone. You can imagine this stone is very much a Zen stone. It's a stone that you would quietly contemplate. This is also from the Setagawa, but this is a much more dynamic stone. It's called a tiger stone, although in this case, it is a white tiger stone. So if we read the kanji across the top, it's Setagawa Tora Ishi, and that simply says Seta River Tiger Stone. And this is also a very famous stone, and that one is even bigger. It's probably 24 inches across. And it is a white hard material with a softer black or gray material in between. Here is a Kamigawa stone. Kamo River is the most famous source of stones in Japan. The Kamo River runs through Kyoto, but it has many tributaries, 7 major tributaries north of Kyoto. This is just a very dynamic stone, a lot of movement. This one's not so contemplative, maybe. It's more dynamic. And here is the kanji for Kamogawa. This is another Kamogawa stone that was displayed at the Japanese exhibition in 2016. Again, fabulous mountain scene, right? That's what this stone is all about, is just a dramatic, craggy mountain scene. And, you know, they go to great efforts to show these stones on fabulous tables, and they carve these wonderful wooden bases for these stones. This is a figure I showed last year when I talked to the club. This is a Doa stone, or a plateau stone. And again, I think this is a scene that every Coloradoan should relate to and vibrate with, if you will, which is, this is where the mountains meet the plains. And so this long flat region represents the plains, and suddenly the mountains rise up where the mountains and the foothills come together. But notice off in the distance, you see another mountain. Maybe that's Pikes Peak, you know, looking up that from, at least from northern Colorado looking south. But the idea is that there are locations where mountains and plains come together, and these stones capture that sort of energy. This is a seigaku. Seigaku are limestones. Seigaku stones are famous for being very rough, very textured. And this one was in the bonsai gardens of Kobayashi when I visited there. They come from around the Abe River, but again, a dark limestone. This is another seigaku. You can see how they have a very rough mountainous texture to them. Here is another seigaku. This one's actually quite small, and this stone was actually gifted to me by a wonderful, wonderful person. And I'll just say thank you. But again, just fabulous texture. And these are really interesting stones. But again, limestone. The other kind of limestone you find are called mako. You can usually tell a mako because they have this banding in it. You can see the little striping pattern running through this, but look how much is going on in this stone. Just a tremendous amount going on in the stone. These often have natural bottoms because they have a little layer of shale. They're formed upside down. They have a little layer of shale, and they erode like on the top of a cave. And then when they break off, they break along the shale line, and they have a natural bottom, and they have all this wonderful texture going on. So again, they're formed upside down. Here is a Furuya stone. This is probably the most famous and well-known limestones out of Japan. I show this one for 2 reasons. One, it has a gorgeous base that has just been elaborately carved. But the other reason I show it is because this was for sale on eBay, and I still kick myself that I didn't buy this stone, because I look at it now and going, that is just a fabulous stone and a fabulous daisa. And wow, it was sold for super cheap on eBay. Although there's a lot of junk on eBay, sometimes amazing things come through as well. And here again, we have the kanji for Furuya. I think one thing that you don't realize if you only go to major exhibitions in Japan is that when you go to temples and you go to sort of local clubs, the suiseki are displayed at 4 level, and you're expected to sit down and contemplate the stone. So I'm sitting here looking at an exhibition that was at a temple that was near Taikon 10, but had nothing to do with Taikon 10. And I wouldn't have known about it except for the grace of Tom Elias and his wife Hiromi Nakaoji, who said, oh, there's a local show going on at the same time. Let's go visit that local show. I was able to visit a few local shows in Japan, and again, they were always shown at sitting on the floor at eye level. Here is Tom and Hiromi talking to a base carver. You get another view of the temple. There's stones all the way around the periphery of the temple. I was talking to one of these gentlemen and said, oh, I collect stones as well. So I showed him a picture of this stone that I collected in northern Colorado and up in the Poudre River. And this stone has taken on a life of its own. It was featured on the website of the Huntington last January when they were running a virtual suiseki show, and I sent in photographs of my stone and they put it on their website. So this is the Huntington's webpage showing what's going on now, and they showed my stone. But I showed photographs of this stone to the gentleman at the local club, and he said, oh, very nice stone, but not a suiseki. And I'm okay with that, right? This does not fit into the Japanese notion of a mountain stone or a waterfall stone or a boat stone. That's totally okay with me, and I did not take any offense to that comment whatsoever. On the other hand, I'm not going to throw it back, right? This is just a fabulous stone. It was featured in a Japanese magazine last spring, which picked it up from the Huntington and said, oh, look at this American stone. These are just two gentlemen sitting outside the Suiseki Club, chatting and having some lunch while we were inside looking at stones. And I just thought it was such a wonderful photograph of these two elderly Japanese men talking to each other. I was able to buy a stone from one of these gentlemen. I did not ask him to buy it, but he offered to sell it. And I was just astounded for a couple of reasons. One, the price was probably a fifth of what it would have cost if I'd bought it from a dealer. And I have this fabulous memory of the stone being connected to this exhibition and this group of people and this temple. So this stone came home for me. It's a Kamigawa. It has this rough sudachi surface. And then later I was invited to exhibit the stone at the, I've got a typo there, the Tokyo Metropolitan Museum of Art as part of its Japanese suiseki exhibition in February 2021. So I shipped it back to Japan and it was exhibited in the suiseki exhibition of Japan back in February. And it's just, for me, just a wonderful stone with wonderful memories and wonderful connections. But Japan isn't the only place to find great stones. I just wanted to show you something that I collected also here in Colorado that perhaps the Japanese gentleman would have approved of, which is a stone about 14 inches long, mostly very black, all sorts of mountain kind of terrain associated with it. So this will make a fabulous stone once I get it into a base. And I just wanted to give you an idea of what we can collect here in Colorado. This is a stone with a kiribako. Kiribako is just a storage box that they store these things in. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I'll just point out that if you do your homework, you can figure out the kanji writing on the box. This stone was for sale for about $1,800 in Taikan 10. I did a little bit of this last year. I'm going to do it much faster this year, and I took out about half of it, but I think this is just worth emphasizing because I don't think we do this enough with bonsai. That is the symbol for Naka. So if you think of John Naka, that's Naka. That is the symbol for rice paddy or ta, and you may have some friends whose name are Tanaka. So that is how you'd write Tanaka. This is Dori. You will see it on street signs all over Japan. This is Yama, which is the, Dori means road, Yama means mountain. And of course, we know this as Yamadori, mountain road, a tree from the mountain roads, which is what our wild trees are referred to. These are, again, I cut this about in half. These are the most common stones that you will find in Japan. You notice they all have 3 lines at the end. That is the symbol for river, and it's pronounced gawa. So this is the Kamogawa River. This is the Setagawa River. This is the, I should really be saying this is the Kamo River. This is the Seta River. This is the Tadami River. This is the Saji River. This is the Ibi River. I think just learning basic kanji for some of the things we deal with is both interesting and useful. This is another tiger stone. You can read that here in the kanji. This is the kanji for tiger. You can almost see a tiger walking around when you look at the kanji. So this, it says it is a Setagawa Tora Ishi, and it has this tiger striping through it. Generally, the black is softer, the lighter colors are harder, and that causes it to wear into really interesting patterns, but a beautiful mountain form. So, Setagawa Tora Ishi. This is a Tadami, just reading the kanji there, that's a Tadami stone. This is actually a stone that I got from Kobayashi. It has a natural bottom. It's one of the few green stones that I've seen in Japan. The Daiza was carved by a late century famous Daiza carver by the name of Koji Suzuki, and you can see the name carved into the base. And again, this just adds to the provenance of the stone, knowing who carved the base. And he really was a beloved stone carver in the last half of the 20th century. This is a stone that followed me home in 2018. I bought this stone on the hottest day on record in Japan. It was 107 degrees in Tokyo. It has a cut base. It's a, reading the kanji again, it's a Sajigawa stone. It has a single baseline cut. It came with a kuribako box. But this stone holds very special memories for me. Again, I visited the Kobayashi's gardens that day and spent a lot of time there, and then obtained this stone from Kobayashi. But just a wonderful, wonderful day. And A, I love the stone, and B, it reminds me of spending the day there with Kobayashi. So very, very happy to have that. And just look at the texture and movement on that stone. For me, it's just wonderful. Here is a tiny stone that was gifted to me. This one is only about 4 inches long. It's very small, super textured. Again, reading the kanji, it's a Sajigawa stone. It is a cut stone, but in Japan, there's a tradition of sandblasting the bottoms and then carving these very nice, very elaborate rosewood bases. So a very small stone, but a very expressive small stone. And again, it was very special to have this stone given to me. So a few more famous stones, and then I won't keep you forever here. This is a very famous stone from the Kamigawa. It's been known for a very, very long time. It's a Kamigawa stone. Kamo also means duck. I sort of played on this double meaning last year and pointed out that, hey, it's good to read a little bit of kanji, because if you want to order your soba with wild duck, then it's good to know how to read kamo on the menu, because then you know you're ordering duck with your soba noodles. I'm going to show you a few photographs from a recent exhibition last summer. Well, I guess a year and a half now, in Japan. This was at the Meiji Temple. This stone is a little unusual for a Japanese stone. It looks very mountainous, but lots going on there in terms of caves and valleys and texture. As you might guess, this is a Seigaku stone. Here is a stone that's very subtle, right? This is just, God, did I just pick this up off the river for no particular reason and put it in a base? But sometimes naturalistic stones also can speak to you in ways that might surprise you. And I think it's one of the ways you grow in terms of stone appreciation, is to sort of see the beauty in these more subtle garden type stones, if you will. Again, this stone, what is going on with that stone? It's not a mountain form. It's not particularly a figure stone. What's going on with that? And I don't know. Here, I have a very strong opinion. I hear Americans say, oh, that's a waterfall stone. And having been in Japan, I would go, no, 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 no. It is not a waterfall stone. Look at the snow laying on the tops of the mountains near this very high peak in the Japanese Alps. Again, this is Kamikochi Mountain. Look at the snow laying in here. This is snow laying in the deeper crevices of the top of a mountain. And I'm sure the Japanese would say the same. I've seen paintings of Kamikochi that almost look like this stone with the snow laying in the deep crevices of the mountain. Here's a stone that is, I think it's actually currently for sale if you want to go searching for it or if you want to ask me about it. It's about $3,000. It is a cut stone. It was recently shown in a major exhibition. And I have to confess, I sort of look at that one and go, okay, would I want that stone? Would I even want that stone? But you have to say it's naturalistic, and maybe we should draw a parallel between this and naturalistic bonsai. It doesn't always have to be pretty. It always doesn't have to look like a mountain. And maybe it does look like some place where you rock climb. You know, maybe you think about throwing your rope up the side of this mountain and just climbing to the top. I have to say that my taste and interest have evolved in stones. At one point, I was just thinking, oh, I'd love to have a couple more Tahu stones. Here's a pair that recently sold for about $3,000. I have to say, I'm just not as interested anymore. My interests have really focused on Japanese stones. Here's an eBay stone. It's a carved Chinese stone. I sort of make a parallel between this and a tourist market stone. They're not super expensive. You can find them on eBay. But, you know, I think eventually you think, okay, I'd rather have a natural stone. Having said that, there are stones that are famous in Japan that are fully carved. One type is called the Yojuro Ishi. This one is owned by Tom Elias and Hiromi Nakaoji. These stones were carved about 100 years ago near Nagoya. So they're considered to be antiques. The original stone was black with a narrow white band running through it. And what they did was they carved the stone away down to the white band and then left some of the black on the top and turned the other part of the black into the bottom. So this is completely carved stone. Nevertheless, because they're antiques, they can sell for $2,000 to $5,000, which is a bit crazy. This one's about 14 inches long. Here's a tiny one, also I think in the collection of Tom and Hiromi. Again, black, white, black, carved down to the white and using the black on the upper side to create a mountain scene. But again, fully carved. Here is a type of stone that will catch you by surprise if you don't know what you're looking at. The Japanese will not tell you this is carved, but they call them blacksmith stones. And the history or myth is that there was a blacksmith working in Kyoto 100 years ago who carved these stones. These are carved to look more natural. There was one that came for sale on the market maybe a month ago, and I was sort of curious because they were asking $16,000. It disappeared within 2 days. Someone bought one of these completely carved stones for $16,000 US because it is an antique from Kyoto. Again, it looks a little bit more naturalistic, but watch this pattern. Small peak, a gap in the mountains, large peak, and then a shelf, but the shelf sort of rolls along the front of the stone. Here is a second photograph of a blacksmith stone I found. Small peak, gap, top, comes down to another shelf, but the shelf rolls and goes along the front of the stone. So there's a formula here, just like with the Yojuro stones. But the Japanese do accept carved stones if they are old enough and if they have a historic provenance. Okay, I'm going to wrap up tonight talking about a Japanese collector. These are stones that were collected in California by Mas Nakajima. I think that he has done some of the most, how to put this, he has collected some of the stones that impress me the most with sort of their Zen character with their subtlety, but at the same time, they can be brilliant in ways that surprise you, but they never lose their naturalness. So I've sort of summed it up here: more zen, understated beauty, and he was just a master at carving daizas. We unfortunately lost him about 3 years ago, I guess. And I got permission from his wife and also one of his good friends, Sam Edge, to talk about these tonight. But just look at how this base cups this stone, and just look at the quietness of this stone. And of course, the interest is in this pool here at the top. Here is one of the stones I assume he's very proud of. He featured it many times himself. Moss did, for example, in Viewing Stones of North America. There is now a book, The Suiseki Art of Mas Nakajima. You can get a hard copy, or you can get a very affordable electronic PDF copy of this. And if you're interested, you can just do a web search, search for Janet Roth Suiseki, and you can find the book, or you can email me and I can tell you how to find it. But I just want to feature a few of his stones and talk about them briefly before I wrap up. Again, here, this theme is, he named this Mount Fuji, or I'm sorry, Fujisan, came from Clear Creek in California. And, you know, this almost needs no explanation, right? It's just a classic mountain form with snow on the top of the peak and snow sort of scattering down the sides. And yeah, you could think of this as being a mountain that you could climb. Maybe you come up around here and you go around the front, you go up the backside, but this one again needs no explanation. Here is another stone that he featured in Viewing Stones of North America. Moss named this First Snow. And again, it's a classic mountain form. You can see a little dusting of snow on the top. It's just a wonderful, wonderful stone without, without being too ornate or without being too showy. Again, it has sort of a meditative feel to it. Here is a stone that I was lucky to also be able to get hold of, and I say that only because I just showed it in the Rocky Mountain Bonsai show back in September. This stone spoke to me, and so I was very proud to be able to have a stone that Moss collected and that he carved the base for. Just wonderful green stone, but lots of texture, lots of personality. So here we're going to do just a little experience of what Moss can do with a daisa. Here's a daisa that he carved for this stone, and then he came along and was not happy with this daisa, and watch what happens. I'm going to back up and do that again. The original base, watch it sink into this new base. To me, it's just amazing how this new base curves around the contour of the stones, and it just cradles the stone. And the difference, between here's a flat base, Moss carved, good base, but here is what happens when you become a master carver and you really think about how the base and the stone complement each other. Just amazing. One more time, because I think it's just so fun. Okay. Here's another stone from Black Butte Lake that Moss collected, a brown jasper with yellow tints running through it. I sort of see two wild animals confronting each other, maybe a gorilla on this side, and who knows what it is on this side, a lion or, I don't know, but lots to see in this stone when you just think about it and look at it. Here's a stone that's just gorgeous. And again, I was talking about seasonality. Here you see fall colors again, right? Think about a mountain that has red maples over part of it and yellow ash trees over other parts of the mountain. Again, a fall stone with just astounding fall colors. Very classic mountain kind of shape. And again, another jasper with a pool stone. Again, red colors, not a mountain form this time, but just look at the way that Moss carved this base to cradle the stone. Just the artistry of his carving is just incredibly good, incredible talent. And with that, I have a picture of Moss and Janet. And I want to thank them, Janet and Sam Edge for permission to use these photographs. And I will close with a picture of two temples, two castles in Japan. The Black Crow, which is in Matsumoto near Nagano. Wonderful to see. We went there a couple of times. The White Heron in Himeji. There's a bonsai collection, again, sort of an amateur or more naturalistic kind of bonsai that you find in the collection here at Himeji. And with that, David, I can take questions if people want to ask questions.
Sure. One question we had most recently, Darrell, are the moss stones cut stones or not?
Some of his are cut and some of them are not cut. I believe the first two that you saw, the Fuji-san and the first snow, I think those are clearly cut stones. The stone I have is clearly a cut stone. I think the very first one was naturalistic, and I think with a natural base, and I believe that those two jaspers we saw at the end were probably natural bases. Certainly that very last one I'm sure had a natural base because of just the way the wood was carved to wrap around it. There is absolutely a California tradition of the single baseline cut, but I would say most of the stones I saw in Japan were also cut. If people were to say, oh, the Japanese just don't do that, they're completely wrong. They cut stones very regularly.
Is it acceptable to oil stones or?
I'm just going to give you the short answer of yes. The Japanese might not say that, but on the other hand, they will point to things like these limestones. And the limestones, if they don't get a little bit of wax or a little bit of oil, will just oxidize or whatever, or weather very quickly, and they'll just turn sort of the kind of gray, whitish color that we think of limestones being. And without that wax, they won't keep that sort of blue tone or those dark tones that are so lovely. So they absolutely are waxing their limestones. And you can tell, if you just very subtly, keep a glass of water with you when you're looking at stones and stick your finger in it and touch the stone. If the water beads on the stone, it's been waxed. Almost always true.
How does someone start to acquire and build a collection if they're interested?
I obviously I have some stones from Japan, and partly that was opportunistic because I was there and it was an opportunity that wasn't going to come around again. But I started just by collecting up the Poudre River or collecting up in the Snowy Range, and there are just fabulous stones up there. I know Alan's here with us tonight. He's just collected some wonderful stones here in Colorado, up at Taylor Reservoir, for example. So I would say just go out to places here in Colorado in the National Forest. I've talked to the head of the National Forest, and they said, if you're taking one stone, yeah, we're not going to worry about it in the National Forest. And it's also technically covered under the there's actually a rock hounding provision in the mining legislation for Colorado. So it's actually rock hounding is a legal endorsed activity that you're allowed to do for specimens.
I think, Rich, you had a question. If you want to just ask.
Yeah, I was going to do that, and then you muted everybody again, so I wasn't really sure what the signal was. Darrell, thanks for this wonderful lecture and presentation. I have a question about lingbi, the term lingbi. Is is that a Chinese term for a location or a type of mineral, or is that also used in Japan to refer to suiseki? I'm not sure exactly what's the.
No, it's a Chinese province, and so it is strictly a Chinese stone. Often, and I took a look at the bottom of your Lingby stone, by the way, as you remember.
I remember we talked about it.
I think I asked your permission, and I looked at the bottom. They are also formed upside down. And so there is usually a top crust, which is often red or orange, and it's a different kind of material, and that does not erode as readily with water, and the water flows around the stone, setting upside down, and then as it flows around the stone, it creates these features, and then they're flipped upside down when they're turned into viewing stones. But it comes from a province in China and refers specifically to Chinese stones. The other thing that Lingby stones are famous for is that they, when you thump them, they make a ringing sound. And so they're actually used to make xylophones, stone xylophones.
Interesting. I didn't know that. So those are stones. Is the mineral the same as the darker limestone that you showed from Japan?
It is a type of limestone, or at least in the limestone family.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Do collectors have interest in petrified woods, Darrell?
You know, in China, absolutely. That's considered to be, completely legitimate in the Chinese tradition. The Japanese technically say that no fossils are allowed, but then, various kinds of fossils creep in, like crinoids that are embedded in a darker stone, and when they polish them up a little bit, the crinoids make interesting patterns in the stone. So you do see fossils creeping into the Japanese tradition, but not so explicitly. So the Japanese would say no fossilized wood.
So that kind of spurred a thought. I mean, the chrysanthemum stones would be a fossilized representation of, or a mineralized representation of a fossil chrysanthemum. What about stones that have, for instance, animal skeleton imprints and those types of fossils embedded in stones? Are those not acceptable or acceptable?
I have not seen them, and again, there are rules, and then people break the rules, right? So the official rule is no fossils, but you do see exceptions. But you don't see them very often.
I have another question, if you don't mind. Just as there are some traditional styles of bonsai trees, the form of the tree, are there traditional images that are conjured by the stones that you've collected or that you've seen others collected? You referenced near mountain and distant mountain,
right.
Waterfall stone, others. What are the traditional classic, if there's such a thing? I don't even know if that exists, but
yeah, you're absolutely right. And you picked up on some of them: waterfall stones, boat stones, figure stones, certainly lots and lots and lots of mountain stones, right? Near mountains, far mountains. Some things you might not think of are hut stones. And it turns out that there's a whole industry, if you will, of people collecting little stones that look like a Japanese hut that's found in the forest. The problem is almost all of those have been manufactured for the tourist trade. So they are very happy to sell you a little hut stone for $50 if you want to buy a hut stone for $50. Right. But they virtually all been manufactured for the tourist trade.
Okay, all right. So, but among the natural stones that are found.
Yeah, I think we've covered most of them. Yeah, and by the way, there are fabulous natural hut stones, and they can be very revered in Japan. I mean, there's a reason why there is a hut stone category. It's just that that's the one that's easiest to
make
and to knock off. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And, the experts get, pulled into this stuff. I've spent a lot of time in Japan with Tom Elias, and I've gone out to his home several times to visit with him. And he says, "Oh yeah, the first stone I ever bought was a little manufactured hut stone. It was terrible." So.
Any other questions, folks?
I had one quick question about the bases. I'm always so amazed by the carving, but you see some stones in a pot with sand. That's totally acceptable, or would they be expected to make their way to a carved stand someday?
So almost in every case there is a carved stand, and then what they are doing is saying, okay, this could be a mountain stone in a carved stand, or this could be an island stone in a bronze or in a ceramic suibon. So it's sort of taking the stone and transitioning it from being a mountain stone to an island stone when you do that. But the Japanese love to think that they have a stone that could either be a mountain stone or an island stone, and you can just switch back and forth depending on, is it summer? Maybe it's summertime and it should be a wonderful island stone, or maybe it's wintertime and it should be a nice mountain stone and it's Daisa. I mean, they can play those sorts of seasonal games as well with their stones. I would simply say that if you find yourself enamored with stones, my advice is just look at a lot of the exhibition catalogs. And I have, over the years, collected hundreds, if not thousands, of photographs of the Japanese exhibitions of stones. So I have them setting on my machine, and sometimes when I'm bored, I just look through photographs from these exhibitions, much in the same sense that you might have a bonsai catalog and just occasionally want to pick that up and look at the fabulous trees that come out of Japan. You learn a whole lot about stones just by looking at a lot of stones. And it also helps with your stone hunting. You will be a more successful stone hunter if you've looked at a lot of stones.
I had one other question. You mentioned the market and stones coming onto the market. Are you talking about eBay specific, or are there other places that stones are sold?
There are other places stones are sold. They're a little bit hard to find online, and it helps if you know a little Japanese here and there, or at least know who the major dealers are. But there are Japanese dealers who are online. It's terribly, on the expensive side. Moramai runs a high-end shop selling bonsai and stones out of the Ginza in Tokyo, but he also keeps an online presence under a website called S-Cube. But those are going to be really expensive stones, or at least from my point of view, those are very expensive stones.
Darrell, thanks very much. I really enjoyed this, and I enjoyed seeing some of the pictures and learning. One thing I learned is that a lot of their stones have cut bases, because some of mine, some of the best that I found early in my collection history, I had seen pictures of the Japanese stones, and I thought, those are cut on the bottom, they've got two peaks that are held together by almost nothing, and they say they're not cut. And so I thought they were cut. And later, after I'd cut some of my stones, instead of making a base to put the not quite flat bottom, well, I'm happy to see now that they do that themselves, and they don't throw the stones away because they have unnatural cuts.
No, I'd say the overwhelming majority of stones in Japan actually are cut. They don't say that, and then they go to some length to cosmetically make it look nice, like sandblasting the bottom. But your intuition is exactly right, Alan. If you see a super flat stone in a little thin Daisa, you can pretty much assume that it's been cut.
Yeah, and you can see two peaks that are joined by almost nothing, and you
Yep.
think that could last for 2 weeks in a creek after it rained.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, my whole take on that is that if I don't think about it again after the first 5 minutes I see the stone, then it completely doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't bother me anymore. On the other hand, if I keep going, that's a cut stone, that's a cut stone, then they didn't do their job somehow.
I think that's all the questions we had in the chat, Darrell.
Okay.
So,
Well, thank you everyone for your patience. I mean, this is really fun to do. And I tried to mix up a bit of bonsai and suiseki together tonight and try to tie it back also to these Zen gardens and Japanese gardens. So I hope that worked for everybody.